It's lonely at the top. This one Vasta Lorde hollow has proved this, literally. Its power, so vast. Its spiritual pressure, so overwhelmingly powerful its mere presence caused other hollows around him to die, the likes of which has never been seen before. However, he had no control over how strong his enormous spiritual power output would surface within his vicinity, which inadvertently killed anything that came near him. Needless to say, no other beings could come near him without dying in an instant. He was a tragic soul in that he had to unwillingly spend the rest of his life stuck in isolation due to his great power, which had driven him to deep depression. Out of sheer desperation, he literally split up his own soul into two bodies to be weaker, for the desire to free himself from the loneliness he feels in the world. But even that was still not enough. The two fragments that had been split from the same hollow turned out to be two Arankars, and unfortunately, the immense power the pair possessed continued to inadvertently kill those around them. However, the two together can share the loneliness with each other, even if they are two parts of the same being. For a long time, they went about their solitary lives as usual, and one day, out of nowhere, a most unusual encounter occurred. They were greeted by someone who was for once strong enough to approach and have a conversation with them, the one and only person in their hollow world who could share their heartfelt sentiment of solitude. Aizen has been fortunate to have discovered two rare hollows that had broken the boundaries between Shinigami and hollows by themselves and had become naturally occurring Arankar. Then, for the two hollows that had been waiting for a very long time to finally get a chance like this, seeing that he's the first to not die from being around them, they willingly joined him for the simple reason to not be alone anymore. Grateful for companions strong enough to be near them and having their unruly spiritual energy be put under control, he feels deeply indebted to Aizen for ending their eternal loneliness. However, he feels no loyalty to the cause, nor does he enjoy the violence and immoral things they are partaking in, but is bound by gratitude and simply doing the job that he has to do. As for the other half, she's just following her other half. Despite having willingly weakened themselves, they still possess so much spiritual energy to outrank every other Arankar in Aizen's army, with the exception of one, which is made known by the number tattoo on the back of his left hand, indicating that they are indeed the top-ranking Arankars of the Espada. These natural Arankars are what you might call an aberration of nature. They are the Primera Espada, Coyote Stark, and Lilynette Gingerbuck, and this is their power. The two could not have been any more different from each other, from appearance, to personality, to capabilities. Completely contrasting figures that share a relationship unlike any other of the Espada and Fracción that we had ever seen. The child technically holds the title of Primera Espada alongside her other half, but she's best designated as his sole Fracción due to how their power operates. Stark, a rather unenthusiastic adult male Arankar that regularly feels unengaged about work or really in anything troublesome, possesses the immense spiritual power as well as the high proficiency in individual skills and natural abilities between the two of them. His other half, Lilynette, is a high-spirited, young-looking Arankar girl who got all of the drive and self-motivation but bore none of the fighting prowess. Her often short-tempered, outspoken, headstrong nature combined with her prideful demeanor easily makes her prone to outbursts of anger when she is judged by her childlike appearance, which is something she sees as patronizing. The childlike little girl hates being treated like a child, to say the very least. Whereas her easygoing and laid-back partner doesn't try to put up an outward appearance of someone expected to be strong, strong-willed, and strong-minded. It's simply not in his nature to be anything that he's not. You wouldn't think the highest ranked and the supposedly strongest hollow to display an attitude that is one of humility or sincerity, but it becomes apparent that he's a man known to play fair. If there's one thing that he has expressed distaste for, it's being dishonorable. Although proven reluctant to follow this path, the old life he despised is not something he wants to go back to, and thus, he becomes fully apologetic about committing the disgraceful things that he has to do, as he feels he doesn't have a choice in the matter. This lone hollow is anything but eager to engage in combat. With that being said, the competent yet modest Primera Espada has demonstrated the ability to achieve more, but he's okay with putting in minimum effort to get the job done, and even considered half-assing troublesome tasks if given the opportunity. Stark is more of a, I want to go home and sleep kind of guy. Much to Lilynette's frustration, she finds him to be way too laid back and easygoing in contrast to what is expected from his position as the top Espada. She always has to tell him to have a sense of his position. Like who was instructed with the assignment to retrieve the human captive and take them back to Aizen? Well, it wasn't the second nor the third ranked Espada, not to mention it was a cakewalk for him, seeing as he easily slipped away from a guy that has a bankai that makes him go super fast, and a freaking Kenpachi Zaraki when they were both within arm's reach of the target. There's a clear hierarchy in place, so why is he so handily giving control to the lower ranked Espada when they're supposed to follow him? Lilynette cares for him and knows that he can do so much more, and because of that, she grows irritable when he gets lazy. Normally, he doesn't stand up for himself when he's getting comically beaten by you-know-who. So when he does tell people to shut up if they start to get loud and annoying, then you know he's serious. Most notably, yet unsurprisingly, towards Lilynette. This eventually led her to only listen to him when he gets serious. All he wants is a little peace and quiet. Stark seems to mostly keep to himself, despite having gained the long-sought group of comrades. Understandably, he doesn't have the most outgoing personality, and it surely doesn't help that Hollows aren't particularly known to be the most social creatures either. At first, he appeared to not show much caring for his fellow Espada in the time of their death, displaying the most complete indifference to their defeat. As the two Primera Espadas are very much different, we see two completely different reactions to their comrades' reported demise. Lilynette showed her sorrow over what happened to the ninth Espada. Having felt troubled by the news, she had asked her other half if he was going to do something. Stark, who became long aware of his death the moment he died, had shown little concern for the tragedy that unfolded in the palace of the Espada, to which he gave her the same cold, lazy, uncaring response as before.
What do you want me to do about it?
When he was sent to take Orihime back to Aizen, there was no acknowledgement of the death of the fifth Espada, nor the defeat of the sixth. And during the battle against the Shinigami, he showed more interest in the power that defeated the second and third Espada than their actual defeat. But we soon learned that under the stoic indifference exists a heart that beats for the lost. The unmasking of his uncaring demeanor was seen at the poignant moment when no one spared a word for the death of Espada number 2. In all the instances prior, Stark responded in ways that seemed uncaring. However, those seemingly uncaring responses can also be interpreted as his way of coping with grief and loss, or something like that. We're told that it is not the nature of a Hollow to avenge one another, with Coyote Stark being no exception. On the death of a comrade, he looks as if he is attempting to distract himself from the growing recognition of him being ever closer to living a sad and companionless life once again. But when Aizen, his lord, did not leave a single ounce of compassion or sympathy for a subordinate that had just fallen, Stark had reached his limit. It's possible that he expected differently from an individual that is not of a Hollow, but a leader that had gathered them together, feeling utterly disillusioned by his lord's apathy toward the strong Hollows that were in service to him. Because, after all, it was his lord that gave him exactly what he wanted, friends as strong as him. That's the sole reason he feels obliged to follow, but simply in the sense that there was nowhere else to go. Split between two bodies, which one of Stark and Lilynette was more like the original is unknown by either. Both half with their own distinct personality and respective names, but the recognition of the reason they exist is also bittersweet. No matter what, they would always stay together so that they would always be a little less lonely together.
これから何するの?
なんだってできるさ。
じゃあどこへ行くの?
どこへでも。一緒に行こうぜ。どこまでも。
The Primera Espada is someone that can be described as smart but lazy, often exhibiting shrewdness and an ability to pick up on subtle details in people's mannerisms and special abilities. Through observation and taking a measured assessment to get the necessary information from an opponent, he is very adept at predicting their future actions or positioning, and arguably even more impressive is discerning the nature of their powers. In fact, he's so good at it that he's the one that's explaining his opponent's power and abilities. With a sharp mind is the acquisition of an exceptionally razor-sharp intuition to feel an immediate sensation of danger, which ensures he'll respond quickly to avoid impending attacks successfully. In sharp contrast, to suit his lazy side is having the ability to attack without having to move a single muscle. Coyote Stark's specialty is firing Sero, being the only known exception to discharge a Hollow's signature blast of destruction without having to assume a stance. And Lilynette, despite being his other half and someone that takes quick offense to being underestimated, She is rather weak, like very weak. They are very much different from any other Arrancars. Stark's weapon in his pre-release state is actually not his Zanpakuto, and Lilynette isn't much of a threat, and the power of her hollow techniques is considered immature. While the other Arrancars divided their hollow powers between their bodies and sword, the Primera Espada had split into two bodies instead, and when the two once again become one, in essence, the two Arrancars have been restored to their truest form.
Kickabout. Los Lobos.
The Lone Wolves. The unique power they hold has never been more apparent. He expects something of an equal return for making the effort to use his pain-in-the-ass release, the Primera Espada's Resurrection. He's transformed into a dual-wielding Wild West lone wolf gunslinger, and she has become one of the dual pistols. Now armed with two guns, the released state greatly increases the attack power of his specialty by carrying much greater firepower. They can instantaneously fire destructive Saros at a very rapid rate. The output can range from single shot to multi-shot to automatic fire. The power, force, speed, and density of the Saro can be adjusted to how they see fit. And they possess a seemingly limitless supply of spiritual energy to fire an unbelievably high volume of Saros, where supposedly shooting 1,000 Saros at once may not even make them break a sweat. Lilynette is still able to retain a sense of feeling and communicate in pistol form, and even shoot at will without the need of her partner. But she only decides to take action when Stark gives up. Not exactly a sharpshooter like him, rather she just recklessly puts him into battle guns blazing. When Gunhead Gingerbuck is not the one shooting, she's seen shooting her mouth off at times. She tends to directly insult their opponents, say how bad a shot Stark is, and tell him to stop whining. Though it's not all mean comments, she will give her partner advice. Sometimes advice already obvious to Stark, and ironically doesn't even follow the advice she gives to Stark.
So what? There's no way you'd lose to that clown?
Guess I have no choice.
As for the person holding the gun, the cool, calm, and collected Coyote, respectively, adopts a few certain personality traits of his other half,
Answer me!
appearing more explicitly irritable when annoyed with Lilynette. Funnily enough, their released form has flipped the comedy dynamics between the two, where he has become the one that comically beats and assaults her, while in gun form. Anyways, his skills in his release state aren't purely zeroed in on gunmanship. If pushed far enough, he can engage in swordsmanship. Stark is able to physically manifest weapons made of spiritual energy from the bandoliers when he's not using the Saro-blasting guns. And the only case when he'd trade the firearms is for a power much greater than just firing Saros, the power to separate their souls. Stark and Lilynette are joined together as one, and they turn pieces of their soul into large packs of spectral wolves that chase down any enemy sighted on command and explode upon biting. When they are united as one, the fully merged Stark and Lilynette appears to take much more of Stark's personality, way of thinking, and willpower than that of Lilynette's, but nonetheless, it's seen that hints of her still manifest, and also in their fully merged form, they declare themselves as both Coyote Stark and Lilynette Gingerbuck. In the anime, Lilynette's soul and consciousness actually reside in one of the wolves, and therefore is at great risk of dying if she gets struck before proper detonation. Their unique ability to separate their soul to form a pack of their own is defined by their loneliness, as it corresponds with their longing for a group of friends, a longing to be a part of a pack, and a longing to belong. The potential within Stark and Lilynette was beyond anything we've seen in a Hollow, and conceivably the duo could be considerably more capable and stronger than they seem. But because Stark hated being strong, it wasn't possible, since that is what caused his loneliness to begin with. It is unlikely that he trained to become stronger since he wanted to be weak. He could never give it his all in a battle because that is not his nature to do so. Stark became the way he is because he had grown too powerful. Lone wolves are so desperate to be a part of a pack. Their capacity to go against their nature had no bearing to the sheer immensity of their loneliness. For solitude is their aspect of death, and the solitude they bear can be split into two halves, each of which says much the same thing in different words. One half is very much like that of fragility, characterized by having to avoid negative emotions when a sense of loneliness arises, often choosing to ignore the loss and avoid discussion in order to regain emotional stability. It's only upon realizing what they're going to lose that it's when they can keep going. For the strength of this wolf is to no longer lose more of its pack and end up alone. And the other half is very much like that of stability, characterized by having to push whom they hold dear when a sense of surrender arises, often wanting to take action for the loss and bring the matter into the discussion in order to support and stand by with the emotional fragility so that they could help them understand that they're not alone. They appreciate what they do have, and therefore they will always pick themselves back up and fight because they care. For the strength of this wolf is the pack and not one itself. It's the relationship between the wolves of solitude that has been keeping their loneliness at bay ever since the moment they came into the world.
Long ago, you were alone. But ever since then, we've always been together. The reason you were able to make it this far is because you weren't by yourself.
In the Battle of Fate Karakura Town, Stark immediately tries to talk his way out of a fight by exploiting the presence of Lilynette. Her being there made their designated opponents quite rather uncomfortable with the situation, if she's going to be around, which made the perfect chance to not fight. It was a strange suggestion for an enemy to make, let alone one of Aizen's top men. However absurd it may seem, his manner was most serious. Stark doesn't really want to do any fighting, and this is the closest opportunity to avoiding one. Aizen isn't watching. His opponents seem honorable enough to not want to get a child involved or harm one. Unfortunate to hear, they take their duties a little more seriously than Mr. Primera Espada. Funnily enough, his one-on-one combat with Shunsui was very much like a pretend fight. The fight itself was casually spent throwing lackadaisical strikes at each other and complimenting each other's skills. However, despite the fight being more like a casual sparring session, the nonchalant exchange had demonstrated just how distinctly dangerous these men really are. Though Stark, being the most humble hollow you will ever meet, overplays his opponent's abilities and downplays his own to keep things as they are, but it was to no success. Poor Primera Espada. He just wanted to wait things out until everything was over. Meanwhile, Lilynette, a rather prideful little thing, tried prodding the captain to help his friend in an attempt to get a rise out of him. But it was to no success, having only become progressively more agitated as he merely brushed her attempts off with a simple, nonchalant response while wearing a friendly smile. What triggered the last straw was his refusal to fight someone who looks like a child and his attempts to shoo her away. Despite him having taken her weapon away and displaying the vast difference in power, she simply refuses to give up. So if he can't make her leave by dissuading her, he'll bully her into submission by motivating and cheering her in her unsuccessful attempts to kill him. Needless to say, a lot of failing, a lot of falling face first into the ground, and a lot of struggling and crying, and more failing. Poor Primera Espada. Eventually, in the Battle of Fate Karakura Town between the Espada and the Gote 13, Stark found himself as the only Espada left, which he then decided that he would like to see the power that defeated his comrades in arms. This is another instance where he conducts himself with a serious demeanor. His sudden interest in the Shinigami's Bankai can actually be interpreted in more ways than one. It can be an attempt to distract himself from the loneliness of being the last standing Espada on the battlefield. He's the last of the three that have yet to fall, and it's not like he wants to carry the burden of Aizen's will on his own in a war that he doesn't even want to participate in. Or it can be for the simple reason that he thinks Bankais are pretty cool and he just wants to see one. Understandable. And he would have gotten one, too, if had not been for the intervention of that meddling captain with the white hair and that blasted sword of his. Then, another disappointment befell the Espada, just as he was starting to feel that the captain most similar to him in personality was something that of a kindred soul, but soon came to realize how truly different they are beneath the surface. But the greatest disappointment, as far as he's concerned, is the indication of his lord's total amount of care for the Espada, or lack thereof. Stark resigned himself to the authority of Aizen and even did things that were against his nature to stay in the group, but the attitude of his leader towards an Espada that was killed in battle brought him a rude awakening. He had quickly realized that this is an organization where loyalty means nothing. The one other person who could influence him, on the other hand, only wants the best for him. While that person behaves like a petulant child, she knows him far too well and sees things that he doesn't see himself. It's less about Aizen not having faith in him, but more so on how much faith he lacks in himself. When the going gets tough, he's just going to abandon his post and his pack when they need him most. She needed to get him to understand that they are still fighting for a purpose. While they might not gain anything out of this, at least they won't lose any more either.
Maybe you're right.
However, in the anime, it took a bit more convincing to motivate him. Lilynette had to momentarily take the lead to get him back into the action and remind him how they were able to get this far.
二人でやってんだ。こっちは一人だぜ。
一人じゃないじゃん。私らで戦えば相手が二人だって。スターク。
分かったよ。分かってる。
Using his true powers, Stark can easily overwhelm the captain-class opponents that were holding well against him in the beginning. However, his desire to not see any more comrades die is still not great enough to offset his desire to not kill anyone. This brief turning point of the fight best shows the stark contrast between these reluctant soldiers. One's conscience was in conflict with their duty, whereas the other may do whatever is necessary to carry out theirs, which resulted in someone taking a critical hit. It was so critical, in fact, all his wolves seemingly disappear, and for some reason, he does not use that power ever again in the manga. The most plausible reason I could think of for the lack of wolf bombs is that it may simply be too dangerous for application if he's in critical condition, or had sustained a fatal blow since separating any more of his soul could prove too costly for his well-being. Or it could be that he has to be in the right mindset to use the power. If a situation is grave, it appears he becomes burdened with a deep feeling of loneliness that unconsciously dominates every part of his mind, only for those emotions to be amplified in this form because he is fighting on his own. Conversely, with the anime altering how the wolves work, Lilynette had sacrificed herself to protect Stark, and in doing so, she left him to fight on his own. He says he can keep going for her sake, but it's apparent that he has entirely lost the will to fight. It doesn't matter that he didn't get a Bankai, and it doesn't matter that his impressive power of deduction hasn't fallen off one bit. All of that didn't matter after his other half faded away. Even after knowing that their leader couldn't care less about them, Stark still wanted to give back and pay off his debt of gratitude to him. Aizen might not be the man he thought he was, but he did give him exactly what he was looking for. This speaks much about Stark's character, that he was and will always be an honorable man in a dishonorable world. Coyote Stark dies, comforted in the realization that he had people he could be around, and holds his last thought of the very person that had filled the void of his loneliness from the moment he came into this world.
I'm not alone anymore.
They will always be together, no matter what, even in death. Okay, how do you feel about Coyote Stark and Lilynette Gingerbuck? Comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions, and your criticism of their character. I'd love to hear what you think of them.